Venom S. In this first video, I'll show you how all the mechanical parts we took from the Jaguar are fitted to the Venom S chassis in around 4 hours. All the work was completed by me single-handedly.
Having recovered the donor parts from the Jaguar and dealt with any parts that needed to be refurbished, we are now ready to start assembly onto the Venom S chassis. I'm going to start with the rear suspension first. I now have the chassis blocked up, ready to accept the rear subframe. Make sure we have plenty of working space around. There's the subframe ready to go onto the chassis. Everything has been cleaned off. The bushes in the suspension arms have been replaced. New track control arms have been fitted. The brake calipers have been overhauled and we've got new brake discs to go on. The whole assembly fits onto the chassis with just 4 bolts.
Right, okay, so we're fitting the rear suspension unit in now, and I've used the gantry crane to put a small hoist in place. And what I've done is I've left the chassis on blocks, on wooden blocks at the back, and then I've used the hoist to lift the whole rear suspension unit up in the air, and then we've attached it to the chassis with 4 bolts, and they go one at the rear there, and then one down at the front there, just ahead of that suspension arm. And we haven't tightened up the nuts yet. We're going to do that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to fit the shockers in position. Right, so we've cleaned the engine and gearbox off somewhat, and before we put the engine and gearbox and suspension into the car, one of the things we're going to have to attend to are these exhaust studs here. So we need to detach these pipes. 15mm nuts on here. You know, these are difficult to get at once the engine's in the car, so we need to do these now. So we've now got the front end of the chassis raised up. I'm just going to pull the dolly out of the way, and then we can start to slide underneath the engine and gearbox unit and pick up on the suspension points, engine mounting points. So let's do that next.
We now have the engine approximately in position, and we can start to lower the chassis to pick up on the crossmember mounting points. You may need to use a small trolley jack to manipulate the engine as you go along. So, the chassis has been lowered over the engine, and we now just need to finalise the position, fit the new gearbox mounting, engage the subframe mounting bolts, and tighten everything up. The Jaguar's original gearbox mounting is bolted to the gearbox with a single bolt. Remove and discard the original crossmember and fit this new rubber mounting in place.
Right, okay, so we've now got our engine and gearbox front suspension unit installed. What we did was just put the chassis up on axle stands and then supported the engine, so that was completely free underneath, so that we can raise or lower that. And then we to get in the bolts, you can see the bolts there that support the subframe. Just slot tap in, and then we're in. Then we can put the shock absorbers on and then fit the road wheels, get everything on the floor. So we just need to tighten those up now. Okay, so we've fitted the engine gearbox, the rear suspension, we've fitted our coilovers, and we've fitted the brake discs, calipers reconditioned where they need to be. So what we're going to do now is we're going to lower the car down onto its wheels. We use the Jaguar wheels as slave wheels, and then we'll be able to
progress on to the next stage.
Okay, so this is the lower part of the Jaguar steering column. It comes directly off the car, completely unmodified. So this is the part that connects up with a pinch bolt to the steering rack, and this part is the lower bearing that would sit into the toe board part of the footwell on the car, and then the middle and upper section of the Jaguar column would attach onto here using a clamp and a pinch bolt, and that's where our new upper column goes onto. Okay, so here we see how the lower part of the Jaguar steering column is bolted into the floor footwell, toe board section of the footwell on the Venom S chassis, and we'll just have a little look at the other end of it as it goes into the steering rack. Okay, this is the opposite, looking from the opposite side now, as the steering column, lower part of the column exits the chassis and connects up to the Jaguar part of the Jaguar steering rack. What we're going to do first, we're going to fit the brake servo in. So that just goes into position there. Stick that in from there. And then the next job is to fit the pedal box in from the other side. So we'll get that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fit the pedal box into the car, and that's retained by 4 M8 nuts that go on the studs that you can see protruding through the chassis from the brake servo, and there's also 2 10mm bolts that go up and bolts on a bracket that goes into the that's on the top half of the chassis. So we'll just wangle that into position and try and get some bolts onto it. This hose is the feed hose for the clutch master cylinder. Okay, so we'll just suspend it. Nuts. Okay, make sure your clutch, feed hose and the connection for the clutch hydraulics has gone through okay. That should be alright. So we can now just put the nuts on. It's a little bit of a fiddly job. Okay, so this is the upper steering column and the brackets and bearings for the upper part of the steering column. So we just assemble those together and then show how that bolts into the car. And as the lower one goes on first. Just slides on. And the upper one goes on. Get it going. There we go. Goes in place. So what we'll do is we'll put those on, put that on, and connect that up to the lower part of the steering column. Right, so we've got the steering column brackets bolted in place now. The wheel is just bolted at the top of the column, but there will need to be a separate crush spacer that will need to go between the wheel and the disc here that's bolted onto the top of the column. Make sure you've got your pinch bolts in at the bottom here, that everything's tightened up all through the column line. Okay, we can now fit this little plastic section which contains things like the pedal switches to operate your brake lights at the back. That slots in here, like that. And then there are two Torx headed screws. Screw those in place. Done. That's it. Steering in, pedal box in. Next one, accelerator pedal. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to fit this accelerator pedal, which came out of the car, in here. This will run a fly-by-wire throttle. But if you need to run a cable throttle on your engine, you'll need a different pedal, which you can actually get off the 2 litre X type, or you can supply a cable throttle. This one, there's a piece here that needs to be removed. That provides a flat mounting plate. That goes on that bracket up there. So what I'm going to do is kind of position that, really, it's probably about there. Okay, so that just needs to tighten up. We've 2 aluminium bars on either side of the channel section. They fit in there neatly, and we've got bolts that go through. There's tapped holes there on each side, so they merely clamp, screw together, and that's completely solid. On the changes rod, operating rod itself, fit this extension piece in, bolt through, drill through 2 holes, bolt through the 2 M6 bolts. Just need to make sure that there's a manufacturing line runs down here and down here, right down the end of the rod. Make sure those manufacturing lines stay in line so you maintain the orientation of the 2 pins, and you can get your gears easily. And these are each end of this goes into a bush, that goes into a bracket, that pin goes through, that clip retains the pin to the end of the bush. Okay, so here is the original handbrake lever that we removed from the vehicle, and one of the first jobs we need to do is these tangs here need to be bent up so that they're on parallel plate, not at an angle as they are there now.
The inner and outer handbrake cables need to be shortened. The outer cable should be cut to 350mm measured from the entry point in the handbrake bracket, and from the same point the inner cable should be cut to 440mm.
We're going to fit the radiator in. The radiator normally sits on these mounting points here, but unfortunately they're a little bit too far up in the chassis for us. So what we're going to do is going to cut these off about halfway along, and then we're going to put some drop mounts on, and I'm going to fit the radiator in, and that's going to sit down at the right level. What we've done, we've cut off the existing mounts, and we're going to drill a couple of holes through to be able to bolt on the new mountings. Okay, so we're ready to fit the drop mounts for the radiator now. I'll just put that in place. One on that side. test it on the mountains to begin with. So we can engage the plastic spigots into the mountains. There we go. Okay, so we just slotted the power steering radiator in place. Make sure the hoses just go down the side, normal position as they would be on the Jag. A couple of bolts in. So having fitted the radiator, we've now fitted the power steering reservoir onto the chassis, and we've plumbed in the feed pipe from the reservoir. We've reconnected the lower power steering pump pipe and the bottom radiator hose. You just need to put a bit of protection down that to stop it chafing against the chassis. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to put that clamp on the top of the radiator. There we go. So we need a similar clamp on the other side. That uses the Jag's top mounting. I'm going to bolt that up in a minute. The top radiator hose needs a short extension piece to go in because the radiator sits a bit lower in the car, but that's firmly in place that now. So that's that job finished off.